Hey guys, what is going on? So I wanted to talk about protein sources and how your source of protein is going to impact your ability to gain muscle, keep muscle, stuff like that. So this was kind of sparked by, I saw a post that somebody had made where they were talking about their inability to put on muscle or just weight in general, and something that they've always struggled with. And then the very next thing that I saw from them was them recommending these very low calorie sources of protein that are basically devoid of any other, macronutrients or, micronutrients or anything like that. They're just very much sources of protein and pretty much nothing else. Okay. So this is a big problem that I see. And this is going to be more targeted towards people who are struggling to put on weight in general. But this is also going to be true in terms of having a, comprehensive approach to dieting and being healthy and being able to put on muscle naturally. These are going to be important things across the board. So I think this can apply to everybody, but more specifically those skinny guys who are struggling to get enough food in. Okay. So not every source of protein is created equal, and this goes on opposite ends of the spectrum depending on what your goals are. So for example, a lot of bodybuilders, those who are trying to stay lean, those are in contest prep, they're really going to prioritize those very lean sources of protein like egg whites. I hear, talking about tilapia and having chicken breast that's not cooked in oil and all this stuff, right? These are protein sources that are very effective in terms of providing a lot of protein without a lot of calories, right? So this is something that's very effective for somebody who's dieting, somebody who's trying to get really, really lean, and who, in the short term isn't really focused on their health, isn't focused on micronutrient intake, isn't, necessarily trying to maximize their testosterone. They're just really trying to get as much protein as possible so they can be full, so they can retain their muscle, and so they can lose weight. Okay, so that is, a source of protein. Those sources of protein, they have their time and their place. But for the rest of us who are not in that situation, who are not dieting down, who aren't extremely lean, who want to have micronutrients in our, food choices, and, most importantly, those of us who are actually trying to gain weight, it makes sense to have protein sources that have more macronutrients and micronutrients outside of just being sources of protein. So for example, if you're having a protein powder, that's a great way to supplement and get more protein in your diet. You're not really going to be getting much else out of that supplement than just protein. That's going to be true of, things like chicken breast and egg whites and stuff like that. Not really the best way to get a overall good diet, but it's a good way to add protein. And if, you have the ability to spare some calories, and if you, want to be a little bit more full and you don't want the excess macros that are associated with some of these other protein sources, sure, they have their place. I'm not saying you can't have these, but again, they're not created equal. If you were to have a protein source like red meat, for example, which is considered to be a superfood because of the, micronutrient density that it has, you're getting a lot of nutrients from red meat relative to something like chicken. You're getting, oftentimes you're getting more fat in red meat, especially if you're having steak and you're having a, fattier cut of steak. You're getting more nutrients, both from a macro and micronutrient profile from something like red meat. Having whole eggs, right? Egg yolks are extremely nutritious. They have, things that you're not going to get in your diet otherwise. If you are deficient in choline, that's going to be really important. I'm not saying everybody needs to eat red meat or, egg yolks. I'm not saying that you have to eat meat. You could be vegetarian, you could be vegan, but I'm just saying, look at the micro and macronutrient profiles of the protein sources that you're getting. And if you're struggling to get in enough calories, egg whites is not going to be superior to egg yolks. Egg yolks are going to be extremely more nutritious from many different angles, and you're still going to get that protein source as well. So things like, like I said, whole eggs, fattier cuts of red meat, whole milk, having, those electrolytes in there. I made a whole video talking about how important I think milk is. It's one of my absolute staples. I understand, some people are lactose intolerant. Maybe you can go for a lactose-free option like Fairlife, which is going to have even, more protein per cup, which is going to be a little bit more towards that potentially cutting side. But that's another thing, drinking your calories. That's going to be another way to, get more calories in if you are trying to bulk up. Things like peanut butter, right? Peanut butter is more so a fat source than it is a protein source, but it can be both, and it has micronutrients in there as well, and you get healthy fats. So really diversifying your protein sources as opposed to just being like protein powder, tilapia, egg whites, chicken breast, those very basic bland foods that people don't really like to eat in the first place, but then they are not rich in terms of other nutrients. Okay, so really kind of shifting your perspective and really analyzing what kind of nutrient profile you're getting from your protein source is going to be key. And then this leads me into another point. People often overestimate how much protein that they need. And again, somebody who is in a severe deficit, who's in contest prep, who's trying to hold on to as much muscle as possible, their protein needs are probably going to be a little bit higher. But if you are in a maintenance phase, a calorie surplus phase, your need for excessive amounts of protein when your calories are otherwise very high, it's not going to be nearly as high, especially when a lot of your body mass is going to be, fat mass, which is not going to need as much protein. Carbs themselves are super important when you're in a bulking phase, when you want to have that energy, when you want to be able to restore your glycogen. And carbs themselves are protein sparing. So if you're not going to be burning through muscle anyway when you are bulking, but people think that they need so much protein. I'm not going to recommend an exact amount, but a lot of the research kind of suggests that you can go for 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Now, obviously, this is going to vary a little bit depending on your lean mass versus, your fat mass. It's going to vary depending on, how much protein you really want to have in your diet in terms of how satiated you want to be. But I've always been somebody who has never really tried super hard to get a lot of protein in, especially in recent years. I've prioritized getting a lot more of my calories from carbs, getting more calories from fat, and not really, pounding protein shakes and getting really lean sources of protein. And this has been the best period of my life since I was about 15 years old in terms of actually gaining muscle. So actually emphasizing protein intake less and focusing on getting those other macronutrients in, while also, again, getting those protein sources that have more micronutrient content, which is going to help with your testosterone production, which is going to allow you to be in a more healthy environment to put on muscle anyway, right? These are things that I consider to be more important. So if you're trying to cram in, these nutritious foods into your diet, but you're putting so much, of your potential ability to eat with these lean protein sources that are not, high in macro or micronutrients other than just being protein, you're going to be very limited in your ability to get in these other nutrients that are going to be important for your ability to build muscle. So can you have too much protein? Not in the context of being like, oh, this is too much protein, it's going to be unhealthy for you, but it's more so your ability to replace some of that excessive protein with other macronutrients, with, protein sources that are a little bit more macronutrient dense in terms of having extra fats in them, potentially having things like, one thing that I used to use a lot was bagels, and I understand that that's not the same kind of protein quality as something like, chicken breast or something like that, but you're getting protein from bagels, you're getting the carbs, it's going to help you in your workout, right? So really experimenting with, different food sources that you can really get a lot out of from a bulking perspective. That's going to allow you to be able to put on weight easier and actually be more supportive of an anabolic environment. So getting 400 grams of protein, which is I see some people do, or 300 grams or whatever, is completely excessive. And if that's how you want to eat, if you can continue to gain weight in that fashion, that's great. But I see so often people who get 300 plus grams of protein, they're really emphasize getting that protein in, and they struggle to gain weight. And it's like if you're having those super satiating foods that fill you up and they're not giving all the other nutrients that could otherwise be provided from other protein sources, I think you're really missing out on potential gains. And oftentimes those, protein sources can get pretty expensive. If you're having really lean cuts of meat, that can be really expensive. So I would really try and shift your mindset to getting more of those things in your diet. And again, this is going to be a spectrum. Some people are going to struggle to, keep weight off. Some people are going to struggle to put weight on. There's going to be things that are in the middle, but everybody needs to have, a comprehensive list of, foods that they include in their diet so that they can be healthy and have the micronutrients that they need, and not just try and get 300, 400, 500 grams of protein. It just gets absolutely ridiculous. I get nothing close to that, and I'm 260 pounds. I don't emphasize that at all. I focus more so on getting, nutrients from, an array of foods that are going to give me an array of micro and macronutrients. And I think that's much more helpful in terms of actually putting on muscle mass, which is what we want to do, but in terms of actually gaining weight as well. If you're not gaining weight, you're going to have a very hard time putting on muscle. So getting, again, 300, 400 grams of protein is not just going to make you super, super anabolic. Sure, get as much protein as you need, get as much protein as you want, but if you need to dial it back on the protein intake and dial it back on the extra lean sources of protein to replace those with things that are going to make it easier for you to gain weight and muscle, that's something I think you should be doing. So again, this depends on your goals. This is not, again, if you're vegan, if you're vegetarian, people have different diets. Figure out what works for you, but don't limit yourself into thinking that these bodybuilding style foods are the only things you can eat, because nothing could be further from the truth. So Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you soon.